Okay, this is November 3rd, 2025 fiscal committee. And we have two of us here, Kyle and myself, Marcia, and Jet could not attend. So why don't, what I was going to suggest is that the fiscal health risk analysis is, at least to me, very interesting. I think there's a number of questions there where I would really appreciate understanding better. And so my suggestion to Chris was that we move it to the end of the agenda and then talk about it. And then if there's more to talk about, bring it back.
That's good.
Yeah. Okay.
Do we have any members of the public in the Zoom?
Yes. We have,
Staff.
Okay.
Okay, any public comment?
Not that I've received.
Okay. So shall we start with 3.1 Q1 unrestricted general fund progress update?
Great.
Chris?
Man of the hour.
All right, so the second page is just the agenda. The third page and fourth are snapshots from the presentation of the adoption budget. So it's just the categories and the budgeted dollars and then the similar categories and budget in a pie chart form. And then at the previous board meeting, at least one board member said, it'd be really interesting to find out how our percentages in these categories compare with other colleges. So I put together a few slides related to that. The slides 5 and 6 are those slides. What I did was select single college districts, which have similar FTES numbers to us, and I made sure I included some local comparisons. So slide 5 is all the percentages, and I revised this 5 and 7 because apparently the little caret symbol I have on there backwards. So the revised version, which will go to the main board meeting, is corrected.
Like
So
greater than
It should
1%?
be less than 1%.
Oh, is this wrong then?
Yeah, it's
Oh,
wrong.
this is wrong.
It's-
Okay.
Yes. So the revised version will be on the full board agenda.
Okay.
Those are all supposed to be less than 1%.
Okay. Okay, that's easy.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
Yes. So my apologies for the typo. I presented it to the budget committee and we had a member of the math department on the budget committee. They said, I think you meant the other way. You're right, I did.
Are we going through these or are you just giving us, because I had a question about like why Glendale's total compensation was so, and here, I guess Cuesta,
Yeah.
what makes them so different?
Glendale has a very low salary scale and they have their salary table has 20 steps.
Oh.
So it
What's the
takes,
clarify?
depends 9
Oh, okay.
For
Yeah.
classified.
for classified, and then it's bigger and it's, different classes for faculty, but
Yeah.
they are not competitive salary wise.
And both Glendale and Cuesta have a huge contingency budget, which is why their
Yeah, but-
percentages there are so large. Typically, that would happen in a year where they're making some decisions about what to do with the budget, but those decisions have yet to be made at the time the budget was adopted. So that can happen, but even so, those are very, very large.
Okay, yeah, those were the outliers for me and it seemed like we were
Absolutely.
very much in the range of all the others that you have.
Yeah, I think we are absolutely in the range. Page 6 is just a graphical representation of that, so you can sort of see in that
So-
format.
Does Cuesta and Glendale do another budget where they resolve their contingency?
If they make decisions during the year, they would do a revision.
But as it stands,
This is from their adoption budget.
the total compensation is a lot less.
Yes. but primarily because the rest of the budget is in.
But they'll still
contingency.
get paid, right?
Yes.
They're covering their salaries.
Just-
They are
yeah,
covering their salaries.
just there.
So the factors are that Glendale is lower salary
Mhm.
and Cuesta is. I mean, it's probably a cheaper place to live. Glendale, I would think, is expensive.
Glendale's expensive, well, Cuesta is expensive because it's, the central coast and
Yeah.
that's pretty expensive, but I don't know, I don't have the background on why that would be.
Just curious.
And then I see you did another set.
Yes, so I presented it to the budget committee, and at the committee, they recommended an improvement for the presentation, which was to include these colleges from the most recent compensation study. So I thought, why not? So these are the colleges that were included in that most recent compensation study. I should say that not all of them are of a similar FTES size as us. Some are dramatically larger, some are much lower.
Yeah.
But these were the ones from that study, and you can see based on the total compensation percentages that they're all really, really close together. Glendale happens to have been in both my selection and also from the compensation study, so it appears twice.
Yeah, there's a third set, which FICMAT did in their second report for us, and I didn't get a chance to look it up, but this would have been around 2019. And the person at FICMAT spent a lot of time analyzing the different colleges and looking at a lot of factors besides size, the composition of the
Mhm.
student demographic, the community, a lot of stuff. So I'm sorry I didn't pull it, but I would consider using that group because
Okay.
the work went into making it really similar before we did comparisons, and we did do comparisons in that report on a number of factors. So,
I'll do the report up and
yeah.
see if I can get the slides updated.
It's a comparison report. It's not the first one that we first picked map, but the second one.
Okay.
And I don't remember which colleges anymore.
Okay. And so page 8 is a similar graphical representation of those percentages. Any questions on this group? Okay. Slide 9 shows you the adoption budget and spending to date in the major categories. I put a little caveat that full-time faculty regular pay is recorded over 10 months, and that September is the first month, and so the percentage is artificially low at this time of year, and it sort of catches up as we go along. And that likewise, benefits will be lower as a percentage and catch up as we go along. But classified are paid on a 12-monthly basis, so that is correct for classified.
Okay, so for that category, that's 16% here versus 10% of the year, is that what you're saying?
Right, so they've only, full-time faculty regular pay have only one of 10 payments have been recorded by the time this quarter was done. And so it's,
So what are the
sort
other
of
ones?
throws off the percentages. a little.
So are the
Everything
other
else
ones-
is correct.
I mean, but based on how much so far? I mean, is this 3 months? I guess I'm just trying to
3
figure out
months.
what was the time.
July, August, September.
Okay. So that would be versus 25%. Okay.
Yes. Exactly. Right, so services are up a little bit, you can see.
So that's the only category then, the services that's
Yep.
like trending higher than what we are for the year. so
Yes.
far.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then the remainder of the pages are detail pages comparing the first 3 months of last year to the first 3 months of this year. So I highlighted some notable items on each page. One of the things to note about the hourly faculty instruction for summer, which looks like it's significantly lower, is that last year we had a negotiated payout of 158,000. So
That was the payout for the SP classes. That
For
was
the,
for the, in the foreign languages, the SP, the
yeah.
per grievance and all
Yeah.
of that. Yeah, that was,
We settled.
that was all settled for, that's what that paper
I
Yeah.
thought that was what it was.
Yeah.
So when you look at the total for that category, it looks like we have spent less, $163,000 less this year, but if you took out the negotiated payment, it's more like $5,000 difference. Last year to this year.
Yeah.
Any questions on page 10, instructional salaries?
Well, they don't look very startling in terms of differences.
No, they really aren't.
I mean, how are you feeling about this? Is this in line with like what you were expecting to see or
Yes.
like how things are going?
No, I don't think there are any surprises, really.
No,
Okay,
it's right on, right on.
okay.
So page 11, the classified. The administrators and regular classified is a little lower than last year, and that is primarily because we had some vacancies that were filled last year that haven't been filled for the first 3 months of this year. And that makes up the majority of the difference. But overall, $131,000 less, so that's positive overall.
Collectively, a number of student workers are lower. Is that on purpose? Several categories here for hourly students.
Not necessarily, it depends. One of the things that is really variable for students is whether or not they qualify for work study. And if they do, then it won't come out of the general fund budget, it comes out of the work study budget, which is separate. So we could be providing an equal number of hours and services to students, but it's being paid for somewhere else.
Okay.
So benefits, sort of where we expect. There was the final payment last year of the early retirement incentive, and so that really makes the difference for us. And then health and welfare, it's higher as we expected it to be higher. I made a note that $65,000 of that is our starting to pay part-time faculty health insurance, which we weren't doing before, which is great. And the state fully reimburses us for that.
What's the lag time in getting the reimbursement? Do we
They
know?
pay us once a year.
They pay us once a year.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's always gonna be
Yeah.
lagging.
And then, so this 65,000 is part of this year to date, so it'll,
Yes.
for the whole year, it'll be more than that.
Yes, it will. Exactly. Any questions on the benefits page? No? Okay. So supplies. You'll notice that the total doesn't match all the numbers above it if you add them together. I had to make some selections to make it fit on the page. So I went with categories where supply spending either last year or this year was at least $5,000. So you'll see those comparisons. It looks like we're spending less in instructional supplies, but actually that spending is taking place in restricted lottery. Just see the note on the left there. Subscriptions looks higher, but it's really just a transfer of an expense because board docs was in contracts, which is in the 5s last year, and it's in subscriptions, which is in the 4s this year. And that's 29,000 of that $30,000.
So that's what that subscription is?
Yeah, that's what the difference is, yeah.
They're making money.
Yes, they are.
Oh, yes, they are.
And client service supplies are literally supplies that they buy for the salon use for cosmetology. So they're getting more clients this year, yay.
And then they get paid back, because that goes into a, and that's, yeah, and TNA account.
Correct.
Yeah.
Any big questions there? Page 14. Services, this is where we're a little higher.
Are more HVACs buying?
Say it again.
Are more of our HVACs dying? The parts are up.
Are we on 14 or 15
Where are you looking at?
13.
or 13?
Oh, yeah, we're having to do some more repairs.
And plumbing too.
Yes.
Okay.
And custodial want, which is lower, would have been them sort of building their supply closets at the end of last year, so they don't have to spend as much on, for example, restroom supplies. They don't have to spend as much this year. It's not because the demand is less, it's just that they built up their supplies before the year finished, and now they're using those supplies before they spend them.
What's the insurance liability, 100,000?
So it's student athletic insurance, and last year we paid it, but we paid it later in the year.
Oh, okay.
So that's why, because we're comparing actuals for the first 3 months, so it looks like it suddenly appeared, but it's just that we paid it later in the year.
So for expenses that are like annual expenses, you don't amortize them throughout the year, it shows when they're paid.
Correct.
Mhm.
Okay.
Correct.
But you forecasted them, so they were already built into the
Yeah,
budget.
It is in the
The-
budget.
In the budget assumption,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
just when it hits the budget is the
Yeah.
question.
Right, because these are last year to this year
Yeah, okay.
versus the budget. You can see that we're trying to get things recorded correctly. We have a lot of subscription-based IT that was in contracts before. It is in subscription-based IT now for the most part, but still, when you add those two numbers together, it's still $240,000 more than it was. And I know our IT department is working really hard to identify subscriptions that we don't need to continue with. And we had multi-year contracts, and now we're going with single-year contracts, so we can make some better decisions for next year.
Yeah, that's a big, subscription-based IT arrangements, that's a
Mhm.
huge difference.
Right, yeah. It is, unfortunately.
What does maintenance and leases mean? I mean, why are they together in that line?
That's the accounting category. I don't know.
Okay.
Why they call it that. Any other questions on the services?
No, I just, advertising and marketing looks like it's like 3 times as high as that. Are there just expenses that we're taking on earlier, or is there something that we're doing different?
It might be the timing of it because we do advertising and marketing. I think that's partially how we pay for printing the schedule for SEL, which needs to be printed, unlike our online classes or our online schedule for the credit program. We don't print a schedule anymore.
Right.
So I think it's that. And then I also think that we've done media buys for fall, and then there'll probably be some more coming for spring as well. So it's just a timing.
Okay, page 15 is the equipment. So likewise, I condensed the list. You can see the construction management is up a little bit, but replacement of equipment is lower.
Now, this is definitely not PE. This is construction management for other things we're doing.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Because the PE would have been recorded somewhere else.
Yeah,
Yeah, it would be the bond.
It's a big difference,
Yeah.
what specifically is that for?
With a lot of little projects that they're doing, some in the library, some variety of places.
That are non-bond at this point. They're not,
That's all
okay.
in charge.
That would all be charged to bond, yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
And our equipment doesn't need replacing, so.
That's not entirely true, but
Well-
okay.
Yes.
But part of it is the timing on the spending, and we are, in the budget committee is currently looking at the resource requests from last year for non-instructional items. And so that certainly could go up once those start getting approved and spent and things like that. So timing is due in part on that. The page 16 is revenues.
So, I mean, I just noticed so far, it looks like all of the expenses are up. I mean, overall, it looks like it's up over last year. Is that what we're seeing?
It is a little
That's a
bit
comparison,
in equipment. It's a little bit in the employee in the non-personnel categories, yes.
Mhm.
Part of that too. I don't know how much of it, but anecdotally, we made a decision to get better control of the credit cards that we had issued across the campus and do a PO process. And so we announced that we were going to be doing that, and then we did reduce them. But anecdotally, I heard that before we pulled back all the cards, that there was sort of a, oh, I better get my spending in early.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is that it hit
So.
earlier, maybe, so. Yeah. Revenues.
And you had budget with, maybe that was something different, with the credit cards. I was thinking that there was that contingency that you had put aside.
Oh, that was
In the
for,
service.
Was it supplies, was that
Yeah.
the supplies in
Service.
general?
Services.
Services,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes,
And have we needed to use any of that money yet? I mean, it's early in the year, right?
it is early.
But that's kind of for later in the year in case.
Yes.
There's, okay,
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, have not needed to use it yet.
Let's hope they don't need that.
Me too.
Okay.
So revenues don't look great on this page,
But
but
it's early in the year.
it's early in the year.
and the accounting folks
Mantra.
are a little behind on data entry for some of the recording the revenue. So I know that they'll.
But the state isn't stiffing us.
The state's not stiffing us.
At
We are
this
getting-
point in time.
So that'll catch up by the end of the second half for the second quarter. December.
Thank you.
Sure.
And in terms of, like the local, is that like the, what's the local exactly? Is that
Property
property
tax.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we know what that is, or when will we get like a revised number from the county or whoever gives that to us, like what the actual amounts will be?
We get a schedule, but
Doesn't change because the allocation is the allocation. So if their money, if the property tax money goes up, that just reduces what the state pays us.
exactly.
Oh, I see.
It's a
Okay.
fixed pie.
Oh, I see.
It's
Okay,
just the
okay.
question
It
of,
won't, who it's coming
right,
from.
so the
Okay.
state is off there watching, saying, hey, we hope
I
those
see.
November property tax bills come in high.
Okay.
Cause that way we get to take more,
Okay.
we don't have to send as much.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wish it meant we got more.
Yeah.
If we were a basic aid district, it would matter, but we're not a basic aid district. Yeah.
Thought I'd ask.
Yeah,
Someone got there before you.
Okay, so we're not gonna, you don't want to do that one right now.
Yeah, let's not do that yet. Let's
Okay.
Do annual fiscal report.
Sure. So this is our 311. I've shared the quarterly 311s with you as we came along. This is the full annual 311.
Of all the documents that we looked at, this is the one that made the least sense to me, I'll just say. I'm
It's just a whole lot of numbers.
Yeah, I'm not clear. I don't know if you want to walk us through this at all, but I'm not, and maybe we've seen this before, but. Yeah, I don't know. Is there anything
Nothing.
that we should be paying attention to or the?
One of the things I'll say that's important that we have in here, and we're required to complete this and present to the board in some fashion. So Finance and Audit Committee is the 50% law calculation. So you'll see on page 4, so the pages leading up to it sort of add up to this number, but you'll see in about the middle of the page, it says percentage of CEE. And then in the first column, it says 53.93%.
Mm-hmm.
So that's our 50% law calculation,
Okay,
and we're required to be at 50 or higher. I
okay,
think,
and that was when the board had that discussion at our meeting about
Yes.
trying to keep it low, above 50, or what was?
above
we had a target,
51. So
yeah,
the target of
51.
51 was in
Yeah.
the budget sustainability
Yeah.
recommendation,
so-
work group recommendations.
Trying to keep it above, at or above that.
Yes.
Okay, but not too far above.
Right.
Must be on the wrong page. Did you say 4?
Mhm.
yes,
But look in the middle of the page.
it's,
Oh,
3.9.
53.90.
yeah, there you
Got it.
go. Yeah. So the question had been raised and it's not as part of this report, so we didn't include it here, but we'll get the calculations done and bring it forward in a future month. What if we hadn't done the COVID-19 transfer, what would the percent be then? So I don't have that number today, but we'll have that number in a future month for you.
Okay.
And what was this like last year? How does this compare to a year ago? Or what's the trend? Is it staying about the same?
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's pretty close to last year.
So we're not cutting it closer yet.
No,
Although we'll do the minus the COVID transfer and see what that says
Mhm.
as a helpful guide for us, so. The next few pages are the balance sheet. So these are for last year. It's good to see that our total assets on page 5, in unrestricted general fund is slightly above 60, almost 63 million. So that's positive for us in terms of cash flow, right? Because we have the money so we can pay our bills and our liabilities for that we're 21 million. So that's healthy for us in terms of the cash flow component.
and just so you know, the restricted general fund amount of $45 million, that's for the South Coast Regional Consortium. That's not
Oh, that's not.
ours,
Okay,
right? And that's very confusing because folks look at it and think, oh, we've got $96 million
Right.
in reserves, but
I
we
see.
don't.
Right.
and when are we stopping our?
That's at the end of this fiscal year, so it's
Of
in
fiscal
June
year,
of 26. But the money that's there doesn't get transferred. It has to get all spent down. It's not gonna get spent down by June. But there'll be time after that for all the spend down, because all of this money relates to the Strong Workforce Grant that started in July of 21 and ends in July of 26. They're
Oh.
5-year grants.
Okay,
So it's not like the money disappears, it's just slowly gonna get spent down.
okay.
And then the new grant starts with whichever college decides to
I
take
see.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this has a fixed end now.
It has a fixed end in terms of growing, but what we need to do as a college is, or as a district is, we'll still work with our regional partners to get them to spend down, because all of this money is actually allocated, it just isn't spent.
Oh, and what's the time frame of, how?
That I don't know. Yeah, that we're looking into,
Yeah,
what our timeline is.
okay, cause I could see that dragging on, especially $45 million. That's,
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's been an issue statewide of the dollars going underspent
Mm.
and then a big rush at the end to try to deal with that. So yeah, so we're just gonna need to deal with the 5 years that right now, but then it'll be another district's problem to deal with the new set.
So when it ends for us at the end of this fiscal year, is the other district gonna have to worry about them getting people to spend the 45?
No,
46,
that's gonna
or
be us.
we have to?
Yeah.
So we're kind of unpaid at that point. too.
Well, we are, except that we still get to collect the interest.
Okay.
So we are, but we will not have a director, so we'll reduce our expenditures, and I've already talked with Devin, our CTE dean, because he did this type of transition when he was in the region, when he was working between Taft and the Kern district. Similar situation where one grant ended and then the next one started another college. So he's very familiar with how you do this. So our expenses will actually go down on this because we won't,
Okay,
we won't have oversight money from an administrative perspective,
Mhm.
but we also won't have an administrator overseeing this because a lot of this is paperwork.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, we still collect the interest.
and the college keeps that interest?
Yes, we do.
Well, that should be pretty sizable, right, for that much?
Yeah.
Yeah.
$40.
Yeah.
Okay,
But it'll be good because we'll slowly kind of wean ourselves away
right,
from
Right.
getting that interest.
And there is a portion of it, but it's a small portion of the restricted that comes from categorical money that
Yeah.
rolls over. So pre-pandemic
Mhm.
in EOPS, CalWORKs, those type of programs, the money you received that year, you had to spend it that year. Post-pandemic, they let you spend it over 2 years. So there's a little
Mhm.
bit of carryover money from that, but not that much. All right. That is pretty much what I wanted to go through. I don't know if there's any pages that you looked at that you wanted to.
Notice
about.
nothing on page 13. Jumping around.
Sure.
We have the bookstore fund,
Hmm.
and we have had discussions and questions about how much of that is inventory and how much of that is cash, and it looks like this tells us.
1.6 million.
For purposes of putting it in the budget, because it was
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
at some point inventory was lumped into with cash
Yes.
as the bookstore money. And it isn't.
Yeah, it's an ending fund balance. Had it all kind of lumped together.
So we
Mhm.
might want to use this to
Yes,
unlump them.
What, you're saying page 13?
yes.
Page 13, see bookstore fund 51.
So she's saying here is the actual cash in the treasury.
Oh, here, I was on the
Where's-
first side, okay.
yeah.
uh-huh.
Versus the other categories, which are accounts
Yeah.
receivable and inventory and things like
Right.
that. Yeah. Yeah, I think on the financial statements, the ending fund balance was misleading because it included other elements as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe we could catch up to that.
Yeah.
Next year.
Any other pages that jumped out at you?
And this whole document, is this something that we submit to the chancellor's office? Okay, and is this once a year? Is this one a quarterly thing or, just?
This is once a year, and then we do quarterly updates as we go.
Okay,
Those are a little easier to understand, follow. This one is. I know my Larry, the controller, he's
So
away this week because he was.
on page 19,
Mhm.
have-
Getting this done. Yeah.
we have,
19?
yeah, page
Yeah.
1975 is scholarship and loan trust fund.
Yes.
We have a big negative there in the county treasury. What's that mean?
Because we have a big positive in accounts receivable, so we have to bring the money in to pay it back. So all of it is
Where do we get that?
in this. What's that?
The scholarship and loan trust fund, where do we get that money in from accounts receivable? Who's owes it to us?
Federal government.
Oh, okay. Well, we can't trust them.
full faith and credit.
Yeah, full faith and credit. Yeah, that's right.
Full faith and no credit.
Jump out at you.
No, not to me. Like I said, I'm not really that clear what I'm looking at, so, yeah. Is there anything you want to point out?
Page 26 is sort of interesting.
Page what?
26. So one of the things that we do is take spending and in the general fund and sort of break it up by the activity
Mhm.
classes. So it's sort of interesting to see where spending is by,
Mhm.
the major categories. And it's not surprising that, fine and applied arts is higher than.
Mhm.
And this is combined for restricted and unrestricted.
Yes. Yes, it is. But it still gives you an interesting
Mhm,
perspective of where the money's going.
yeah,
Mhm.
So what is the other outgo, 7,000, have 10 million, but no other, it's not listed elsewhere. So
Where
it's
is
like
that? Where are you looking?
total expenses, it's total expenditures
bottom.
at the bottom, the blank, it's blank all the way down to the 10
Oh,
million.
oh, it's student financial,
left column.
financial aid for students.
Okay,
So it's not categorized in a particular category as a result.
okay. And since I can't do this sort of thing in my head, the operating expenses, is that 15% of total? Since we're saying we're at 85,
Our target is 85 for the unrestricted general fund, but the restricted categories don't have that same stipulation, but I will do the math for you.
thank you.
It's at 20%.
So we're in restricted area, more operational costs than in unrestricted.
Right, and that's typical, right? You'd want, especially in areas where some of the expenses is for direct student benefit. You want the expenses in those categories so that the students are getting more of the allocation. And less of it is going towards administrative overhead and things like that.
So if we're talking about doing a policy that has a goal for that
Yes.
percentage, should we do two of them? One for restricted, one for unrestricted?
I think we should only do unrestricted because we don't get to decide the spending conditions on restricted funding. They're given to us.
Mhm.
And because of that, I would hate to put a percentage on a target on those. Because the legislature could say, you do this, and if it's different than what our policy says, that would be problematic. But
Mhm.
unrestricted, we have that kind of control.
Okay.
So those are and then the pages that follow also have some additional interesting categories, but
Mhm.
for the most part, that's what I find interesting.
So when it says academic faculty senate,
Mhm.
I'm on page 27,
Yes,
that category is all under non-instructional
that is correct.
because we're basically paying release time on that.
That's
Is that-
correct.
Mhm. Okay. And are we paying release time for course and curriculum development?
Yes.
It's a bigger number.
Not all of it is faculty release time though, in course and curriculum development, because you have classified staff who are in
Help
that
with that.
area.
Mhm.
Some of those areas, like ones you just pointed out, and a little further down the page, counseling and guidance, those are the ones that I have a lot of advocates for changing the 50% law. So they get,
Bigger there,
they get,
to make it bigger there.
yeah, or they get, upset because that doesn't count. When you do the 50% law, it's only direct instruction. So counselors are, yeah, I don't like this phrase, but they're on the wrong side of the
Equation.
of the equation, right? Even though they're
But then
faculty
we
and
would
even
be
though they're
even,
providing a service.
we would be further over.
Mhm.
If you added them in, it'd be
Yes,
a higher percentage.
yes. I think it's more of a concern about the message that it sends about the value of counselors versus the calculation itself.
Yeah, it would tell us to reduce. Reduce something to get closer to 15%. I don't think that's where anybody is advocating.
No. Any other questions?
So if we knew how to read this better, we'd learn a lot, huh?
I mean, the pages that show all the detail about the areas of spending, I think those are pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Kind of give you a sense of where the money's going, both in restricted and unrestricted.
None of them correlate directly to the kind of goal, board goal of understanding what we're spending for students who need additional help to close the gaps in success.
They can if those students are enrolled in some of the specialty populations. So on. So it's. 28. It has. DSPS, EOPS.
How works.
Works. So those are some of the restricted specialty populations that get additional help. But I think the presentation that went to the board and the board asked questions of, okay, we have those gaps now what? These wouldn't necessarily speak to that because we're already doing these things. So it would have to be changes in behavior in other areas. And this won't show you that.
Yeah, no, this doesn't, but that, you're getting at it a little bit.
Yeah.
But also like the Moja, those programs don't show separately, right?
No, I don't think there's a special call out for emoji, even though we do spend that separately.
So asking to understand what is spent in that area it's gonna be harder than just lifting the numbers off of here.
You won't get it from this report,
Right,
but
it'll be harder.
yes,
But we have the information, right?
Yes.
It's just not in this report.
right. The Moja does have to file an annual fiscal report with the state. So there are those kind of reports if that's something that. you're
But
interested
it's
in
the state who determines what's here, so the
Absolutely.
state is the one that needs to add Umoja to this. Like
looking.
it's,
If you want it in here,
if you want it in here,
yes.
Yeah, and I was thinking about how hard it is to produce a report that would address that
yeah,
board goal.
yeah.
And, you know, it's harder than pulling numbers out of here
Mhm.
that you had anyway.
Yeah,
Yes.
But it would be something that it would really be good to look at.
Are we good with that one?
So, anybody else have any other, or things you want to point out to us?
Nope. Those are the main things.
We still don't have any public, right?
Public went away.
Just want to make sure we're not missing any public.
Yeah,
comment.
I know, looking up there occasionally. I guess we got too boring. Okay. So
total
next,
cost of ownership.
total cost of ownership.
Okay.
For me, I was thinking about, not just a funding plan, but also numbers that would fit here, that would give us a sense of how much money are we talking about in each of these categories. So my question would be, can we come back next time or whatever with numbers? Because to some degree, that might influence how I feel about what we're covering.
Mm,
Um,
Well, they did a fairly comprehensive study in the TCO report, which is a few years ago now.
yeah,
So.
really an update of that.
Right, so I can apply sort of known industry cost increases to that report and come back with revised numbers. They won't be exact. If we wanted something more exact, we'd have to do another study. But if you're both comfortable with me
Well,
just
it-
applying industry increases and as an estimate.
Well, I think that the differences for us are, we're looking forward and having certain costs associated with the PE building.
Sure,
So that'll be dramatically or not dramatically, I don't know, different from what we now have. And was included in that previous analysis.
yes,
So that's different. And then I am not 100% sure. We talked about these, you know, I have been continually concerned that we're not setting enough aside enough for facility maintenance. And, you know, periodically we're not getting it from the state either. So things just don't get done. And so the question becomes, if we talked about analyzing it in terms of what are we spending already that's in the budget for the people that do that work and the, you know, things they need, like plumbing to do that work. So we could see how that compares to, or understand if that compares directly to that part of it, the yearly operating cost part. And then there's the capital renewal cost, which could be partly unrestricted general fund as an option, not usually 100% of it, but part of it. And so
Mhm.
that question would arise in my mind, you know, should we say, we're anticipating capital renewal costs next year in our budget of X. And so toward that, we will put Y, and it's some kind of percentage, you know, is it 10%, 5%, whatever. In hopes that the state will do more, but you know, that we're at least setting aside something for that
yeah,
and
sure.
able to move on that.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly can get some updated values and get a general projection. But what I'd say for the yearly operating costs for, it's already included in the budget, but I can pull those numbers out so you have it, right? Because that's that's basically the people and the supplies for them to do their work.
Right.
In
And-
grounds and custodial and
Right,
maintenance.
and I just don't know whether that is equal to what total cost of ownership would now be, or whether it's more or less. I'm just kind of wondering.
Well, total cost of ownership has three parts.
Right. No,
So-
I mean that part of total cost of ownership.
Yeah. I guess
So what are the three parts?
so yearly operating costs,
Oh, like that's.
Capital
Yeah,
renewal and for
yeah.
cost 75, yeah.
capital renewal, and then first, it's a weird name that they gave it in that report, first cost 75 years, but basically it's the cost of building the building. Spread out over 50.
I don't think it's first cost, yeah, so more like cost.
That's what it was in,
75 years.
that's what it was in the report, so I just used the same term.
Yeah,
But capital renewal costs, it's very common for districts to use. They like the sort of the industry term is braided funding, so you see a wide variety of funding sources. I do recommend having a funding mechanism through the general fund like we're talking about. I worry a little bit about making transfers decisions before the actual costs come about, because once you move money out of the unrestricted general fund into a project fund, which is in the fours, it's really difficult, if not impossible, to get it back if you need it. So in here, what I'm recommending is sort of identifying a source of funding like interest, let's say, or something else, and creating a general fund, unrestricted general fund, sort of sub fund or designation. Which you can do, and the board can make that, we could have a policy and then the funding will go in there, but in times of need, if we need to pull it out of there.
You can do it. Yeah, but that's true of our existing equipment and construction fund. Or maintenance fund that we have.
It is until it gets involved in a project that involves more than one source of funding. Once you get involved in a project that has multiple sources of funding, it's an accounting nightmare to try to get it back in. So it doesn't happen that often, but in times of fiscal crisis, you just want to have easier access to the fund.
So you're saying instead of actually making the transfer from the account or from the fund, one fund to the other, you're just identifying the source of that fund in case we need it? Is that what it's?
So I mean, what I'm saying is we would identify the source and we would do the transfer when the project, for example, when the board approves the project. But until then, I hesitate to transfer.
Like
Fix the roof on the admin building.
The renovation, whatever.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we don't, I mean, we occasionally approve those under the contracts that we get,
Yeah,
but we don't systematically look at, for example, the scheduled maintenance. And I know some colleges do look at, have a presentation on our scheduled maintenance and what are our priorities and all that kind of stuff.
unfortunately, we haven't received state schedule maintenance for the last 3 years, but we have not received state schedule maintenance for the last.
No money, but we had,
Yeah.
people have a plan for it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that the board has seen and discussed and that kind of thing,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we haven't historically done that I know of.
Okay. I can certainly bring that.
Yeah, but it would be. I mean, if we don't put it in the budget, we won't do it.
I'm not
Even if we
suggesting-
put it in the budget, we might not do it. But
Yeah.
at least it identifies what we think is a fair amount to be used, even though we're not getting state money.
Yeah, and I think we should identify it in the budget. Either it would go in one of two places. Either we could create this sort of sub-fund whose board designated purpose is to pay for those sorts of things. And then transfer it when the board approves the project, whatever that happens to be. Or what we have been doing in the past is budgeting a transfer, some amount as a transfer into projects. Which we could continue to do it that way if that's the.
Well, we've also budgeted money for the construction fund and for the equipment fund. So to me, this
Right, but those are,
overlaps.
so you transfer from the general fund into the
Right.
construction fund.
Right.
That's my only concern is doing it sort of as a blank check without the project ready to go. That's my, a little bit of concern I have taking it from the unrestricted general fund and saying, okay, we're gonna keep funding this. But then there's something happens and you need that money back, it's harder to get back. That's the only reason why I suggest the sub-fund.
I'm not sure why it's harder to get back, other than the fact that you're gonna have a half-finished project, which happens anyway.
If state money is involved, let's say it's a project and we're using some state scheduled maintenance and some funding from the unrestricted general fund. You have to justify to the state taking your part back and leaving their part in, and that becomes, it's not that it's not impossible, it just becomes very difficult.
Okay,
That's all.
well, I think now, what are we doing now with
Transfers.
construction fund?
We do transfers out of the general fund.
Yeah,
But we haven't done it very much in the last year.
well, I know, that's been my concern.
Right.
I haven't made much progress on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, to me, it would help to have some numbers here for like, this would mean something.
Okay.
This would be about so much. or-
Yeah, and I guess that's my question. If we're looking at a policy where we're setting aside a certain amount, it's kind of important to know like what amount we're talking about
Right.
because, I mean, I don't want it to be so I agree with you that, you know, we need to be putting more away for this, you know, renewal and upkeep and maintenance and renovation. But I don't want it to like, you know, hold us if it's so onerous that, and it, you know, it's interrupting other things that we need to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
So,
you're looking at getting some more like estimates that are more concrete to kind of give
yeah,
us a sense of
like,
what. this
first off,
will be.
in the yearly operating costs of what we're spending, and that may be the amount that they calculated. I don't quite know. It's, and then in capital renewal, it just seems like we are a source of fund for that. So what do we think would be fair? You know, I mean, isn't capital renewal basically your scheduled maintenance?
State schedule maintenance is a source of funding for that, so that's
Yeah.
the first one on there.
Right.
Local
But I
is,
mean, is
our
there,
district
is there
funding.
scheduled, are there things outside of scheduled maintenance that we should be doing? Or is the list the same?
I don't know what your question is.
Well, you know, do we list all the things that we should be doing for our facilities in scheduled maintenance? Or are we somehow limited by the state, so we can't list them all, there are others over here outside of it?
Oh, primarily, we list almost everything that raises to the level of a project. If it's sort of, we commented earlier that the spending in the fours included some additional spending in HVAC parts.
Right.
That wouldn't raise to the level of a project, so that wouldn't be in state scheduled maintenance, but sort of the bigger things do arise, and they do have a schema that they prefer you spend money on: roofs, HVAC, plumbing, certain categories. So there may be categories that we're interested in spending that are outside that. Less off, lower on the list would be replacing old carpet, for example.
Where's elevators? Is that higher?
That's our list. Yeah, because it's safety. Yeah, but it's not that you can't spend money on those things. It's lower on their order of priority.
Well, that would be helpful because see, then you could, I assume, have some estimate of the capital renewal costs. And try to make some decisions about what we should put in for that to make progress.
Yeah, I can try to take the numbers.
That's what's going into the
Update.
construction fund now is not gonna make progress on that.
That's true, which is
At all.
in part why we have to use bond funding as one of those.
Right,
elements
but
of
we're not gonna
operating
get
fund.
to bond money that we can spend for quite a number of years, I think.
3.
Well, that's a while. I don't like the idea of sitting around and not being able to fix things for 3 more years.
Sure. Yeah, I can bring the updated numbers.
Well, that would be great.
Sure. Any other comments on the draft?
Well, I feel like I would want to relook at that after we get some numbers, because just saying, here's where it might come from, doesn't cause it to happen.
Okay.
Then, as I mentioned, I don't know if it was before you came or not, Kyle, but the FICMAT thing, I think, has a lot of interesting stuff. I did my own version as a semi-educated person of the answers, and I got about 27% instead of 14. But that can be because I'm not understanding fully what it is we are doing that causes it to be a yes
Okay.
versus a no.
And so just so I have some more background.
Yeah.
So you and your staff answered these questions and
Correct.
came up with this number.
It's a built-in formula,
Mm.
so it just has you answer yes, no, or not applicable, and then
And a
it
certain
it
value
gives
of
you a-
score for each
Yeah.
answer. Okay, I see. And I assume lower is better.
yes.
And there's not really any way to compare us to like others or like where should we be? Is this just kind of an internal
They
analysis?
have on the FICMAT site, they have some instructions, but basically it says, what is it, under 24?
Mhm.
It's low.
Mhm. We're on the low end. Primarily,
So when I got 27, it pushed us in the middle, moderate, and then there's high.
I think primarily for when I went through and looked at the no answers, primarily for us, many of them relate to the budget deficit. So fixing that which did our score even lower.
Well, and once you're here for 3 years, I think, then their score will go up, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's a weird one, isn't it? Like, okay.
You don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
Just stay here.
Right.
and then it'll get better.
I did think that was an odd question. Did you have particular ones you want to ask about?
Yeah, I did, and unfortunately, I thought I sent it to my phone and I didn't.
Oh, okay.
But let's see.
Well, if there's any ones that either of you want to ask about, let me know.
So I noticed that no category was higher than the 2%, but I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the specific yes or no answers, so.
Okay.
You know, I'm assuming that you knew the answers, but
Yeah.
I'm curious though, because yours, you know, you said Marcia was different, so you must have answered some questions differently then.
I had more no's, but
Or knows, yeah.
that's, as I said, not necessarily informed no's. So the first one you have a no on is the independent audit report meets the deadline, and I think that means we didn't.
Correct. The board approved the audit in January and the deadline they have on there is December 31st.
So,
But that was
So-
because we were going through the whole thing with the controllers and
yeah,
figuring everything out.
yeah,
If we hadn't had that, it would have been done on time.
yeah,
It will happen again this year.
it won't happen.
No, it will. It
It
will
will?
happen again, because the federal government is supposed to put out a advisement document on audit in April. And that document has not yet been released. And so the state chancellor's office is going to put out a document that says districts have until later to submit the board approved completed audit, because they don't want us to split the audit up and do some before that advisement comes out and some after that advisement comes out. So we're still waiting for the advisement.
And it could be years before we get it, right?
It comes from the Office of Management and Budget, but they do have a lot of input from Department of Education, so.
What department?
Yeah, exactly, I know.
So I don't know.
Department of what? And anyway, this was only, that no only accounted for 0.1%.
Yes, yeah.
There, it's
Not that big of a
Yeah,
deal.
yeah.
Right,
Yes.
okay. Budget assumptions, multi-year projections aligned with the signed state budget and students and funding formula.
Where are you now?
I'm in budget development and
2.1.
adoption, 2.1.
Okay, 2.1, but that's, oh, you put a no on that one?
No, I'm just looking at that question. So, I'm not sure that aligned with the state budget and SCIF means much more than, yeah, we pay attention to that.
Right,
Yeah.
You,
yes.
okay,
And
Exactly.
we look at, and correct me if I'm wrong, because we're looking at the exhibit C and we're doing our own, we're getting what is our revenue, and it's showing us exactly what is our revenue relative to the SCFF versus
Mhm.
hold harmless versus stability. So we are.
Right, and when we do the fiscal projections, we use source for the COLA, the outgoing COLA
Mhm.
numbers that
Yeah.
are, you know, reliable. So we use the
Projected.
legislative analyst office
Yeah.
as the source and those sort of things, rather than coming up with our own.
Mhm. So the next one, budget development method other than a prior year rollover. Now, I had the general impression we were doing a lot of rolling over. And then after that, looking at right now, especially, whether some of that makes sense. But we were predominantly rollover and then, you know,
In the areas where we have the ability to make adjustments, which would be in non-personnel areas. We went through everything with a fine tooth comb. The finance folks sit down with the deans and department area supervisors and go through their budget with them. So we take a.
but that's currently. I think previously we weren't doing that so much.
No, actually, Brian was trying to get that set up, was trying to have those meetings because he recognized that this was part of the problem, was that there wasn't a lot of pre-discussion about budgets. It was just, oh, budget is put together in May and here it is. And so his in 24, in the spring of 24, I know that he had the controller meet with departments and deans and was trying to do this. So it's
Okay.
more than 1 year old, just so you know. Yeah.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. I
Mhm.
just, you know, there was 1 year when I think it was Lori said, let's do a zero budget analysis.
Oh,
And it just fizzled.
yeah, you have to really be prepared for that. Yeah, we're not prepared for that.
It doesn't surprise me. And we use position control. That is pretty recent too. 'Cause
Yep, very recent.
we had no control pretty recently. Do we coordinate it and include faculty, administrative governing board? Yes, I think so.
Yeah, that's a resource request process that we do.
Yeah.
for Granby.
Includes a calculation of
Mhm.
shift. I think that we do that.
Mhm.
Expend restricted funds before unrestricted funds, just that.
We make every effort to do that. In
Mhm.
fact, you'll see some of the purchase orders coming forward that use, for example, strong workforce.
Mhm.
So we try to make sure we use those where we can for equipment and other capital renewal before dipping into our own.
And how do we literally do that? I mean, does somebody see the item and say, oh, this could be restricted?
Yeah.
Or-
Yep.
Yep, that's exactly how it happens. And that's something that we talk about in executive committee, like looking at strategically, how do we use various pots of money to cover things? And a lot of times it's looking at what are we allowed to do?
Mhm.
You know, and like the way that we use AB-19 funds and all kinds of things. It's what can we do here to help the general fund?
Right.
How can we be as liberal and compliant as possible? So yeah, that's an ongoing conversation. Yeah,
No, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
in some other districts, what happens is that departments try to hold on to the restricted money.
Mhm.
And so they spend general funds saying, well, I want to keep the restricted money, except that the restricted money and some general fund money has time limits. And so you wind up saving it and then you can't use it because you've lost it. So
Mhm.
no, that is very much conscious.
Good. Well, that, I was concerned that that could happen, and that's good to know. Documented procedure for evaluating proposed acceptance of grants, et cetera.
So I said,
Um,
no, we do discuss it in detail in executive council, but there's no published policy or procedure. So that's the part we don't have.
Should we?
I think we definitely need to have a process in place, and that's something that I definitely identified when I got here that,
Mhm.
and it's part of what we're dealing with RAISIS, because
Mhm.
when I, had an initial meeting, my first question was, so when you all applied for this grant, what was your plan for institutionalization? But there wasn't a conversation about it, and that's not their fault. It's that just wasn't what the college did, but my other institutions, we actually had structures in
Mhm.
place, committees in place, actually, that reviewed to make sure this is what you're applying for. These are the institutional effectiveness or research needs that you're gonna have in order to do the grant. What's the plan? If you hired this person, where does it go? And so we just need to catch up with that.
And how is it consistent with our big picture? plan?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, we had, this is, to my experience, it's been like a one step forward, two step back thing, because it used to be the foundation had a grants person. And they would apply for grants, and the communication with the college was either non-existent or minimal about, does this fit what you guys? want to
Yeah,
do?
that's not the case anymore. They've got Rachel Johnson and the foundation is much better. I mean, and that was a different person too. No, there is definitely conversation that happens before the foundation applies for anything.
Okay,
We don't do that.
well, that was the one step forward.
Yeah.
Then the, you know. the
Yeah,
rest of it
no, we
still
need
needed
to,
work.
we definitely need to clean up and have a process.
Okay, not enough revenue
2.8 is the deficit.
is no.
Mhm.
What is a contra expenditure count?
Wait, I'm sorry, you said 2.8 is the deficit,
The reason it's a no is because we have,
Cause
Well,
we have a
yeah,
deficit.
the 2.8 million?
no.
No.
The question 2.8.
Oh, okay, that's what I didn't understand.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't think there's dollars in here.
Okay,
And then 2.9, using negative or contra expenditure accounts. What is a contra expenditure account?
So we have employees that are district employees that work for Follett in the bookstore.
Mhm.
What you should do is put their expenses in the expenses, put the revenue from Follett paying for that cost in revenue. Rather than reversing the expenses with the revenue so that it looks like it's zero.
Okay,
Clear reporting.
so we've got that.
Mhm.
Okay. Board adopted budget calendar that includes statutory due closing dates, account receivables, major budget development tests and deadlines. I don't think we have all those things yet. We have had a calendar mostly about consultation, but we haven't had all those date things. Which, and who's responsible for all that. Which I certainly wouldn't mind.
We should take a look and see if we have an AP that goes with the budget calendar, because that would be in a more appropriate place to put it in an AP.
Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
do we have it? Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll put a question mark on that.
yeah, you could also just. It would be better as an AP. but
Yeah.
It could be under one of the board budget
Mhm.
development
Yep.
principal things. But I'm just thinking in there, I'm sure I was
You
a
probably said
no
no.
because we didn't have as many of those things.
Mhm.
Did we close with the county on time? Yes,
Mhm.
I guess. There is a time,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, budget monitoring, actual revenues and expenditure consistent with the most current budget projection of each major object code. That excludes the fact that they're not. That we don't have enough revenue to cover all the expenditures, but it says we knew it was coming, right?
Right.
3.2. Quarterly. Is that, do we do it quarterly?
In our financial system?
Mhm.
We do.
Okay. Is that part of what we see when we transfer things back and forth or from one account to another, or is that
Yeah.
separate?
Mhm.
That's right.
So you're truing up when you have to do
Budget transfers.
budget transfers.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
We do more than quarterly.
Our quarterly 311 Qs submitted to the board quarterly, and this is where I had a no, with a clearly written summary of the report, budget assumptions and budget revisions, which is like this one we just looked at for the whole year. There isn't a summary. There's so far what we see is like what we just saw, which
Mhm.
is the numbers. But we don't have a clearly written summary yet.
Okay.
So. I mean, it's half done, but partly done. But I would say for the most part, we don't know what, we board don't know what we're looking at
Okay.
for 311 Qs. Necessary budget revisions in the financial system to reflect settlement costs before the next reporting period, and that you have that for a yes. Do we incorporate that into our 5-year projections at that time?
I believe the last time you settled in the summer of 23, I believe Brian added it to the 5-year projection.
Okay. Because that's what I think we
Yeah.
should be doing.
No, I think it was added because I think he was concerned.
Yeah, well, there has been continuing concern about when we approve collective bargaining agreements, we have a clear estimate of what it's gonna cost us and how we're gonna pay it, and I think that may be in a later question, but, yeah, because we thought we had it and we didn't.
No, I think
sometimes.
it is.
ACCJC annual fiscal report, have we ever gotten any? I mean, we have a fiscal report from them,
Yeah,
Right.
what happens is we do the fiscal report and we submit it.
yeah,
And then this is something I need to tell the board, because in the budget sustainability recommendations, one of the recommendations was to get their CFI instrument and get a report. I conferred with the ACCJC. That's their internal tool and they don't share the report with the college. You only find out if they're concerned and you fail their internal control.
okay, so we're not hearing from them.
We have not heard
Well,
from
no
them.
news is good.
No, no news is good news. So we submit our financials in April when they're due, and then they internally go through, they put it through their tool. And they only reach out to colleges if the tool score comes back at a certain percentage. And that's when but they do not share the tool and they do not share their assessment.
And that was something that we identified in.
In the budget sustainability work group, and I'm not sure why Cambridge West put it in there. I don't know if they'd ever asked. I mean, maybe they knew about the tool and thought it was a public document. It's not a public document.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'll be including that in my update to the board on the budget sustainability
Okay,
work group
no, that's
recommendations.
good.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Mhm.
Silence is golden.
Silence is good.
And we haven't been notified
No.
we're on a watch list.
Nope.
We were watching you.
Mhm.
Budget blocks, hard budget blocks, how does that work if banner and budget are not connected?
Banner is
I
connected to the
think-
budget.
Well, I thought we said, maybe it's later, that they are not connected in the same way. We put a
I think it's the next question about the district encumbrances around salaries and benefits. I
Those are
think
not-
that's the issue, is getting
Okay.
those to connect.
Okay,
And Banner doesn't do that. It's also, it's just one of the things in the system, right? So in the Banner system, it has 4 columns, if you will. It has the adopted budget, the adjusted budget, encumbrances, which would be like if you write a purchase order and it's putting the money on hold. And then the difference, so whatever's left over to spend. So this is basically saying first, known salaries and benefits using position control in that encumbrances column. Does it put a number in there so that you can see how much money's left over?
mhm,
And it's just not a feature of Banner. It doesn't do that.
But Simpler Financials is able to do it, isn't it?
Not for position control.
Not for position control.
Simpler Financial just extracts from that.
Extracts it. Okay, I thought that they could do that somewhere.
but how then do we put in a block, a hard block?
That's different. So that means at the end of the year, let's say they're done with 24-25 and they're getting to the end. So as they reach the end of a fiscal year, you could start to put in measures in Banner that don't allow new POs to be written, for example. Once they close the fiscal year, it won't allow any expenses to be recorded, things like that.
that's the hard blocks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, quarterly reconciliation is yes. Let's see, balance cash and investment monthly. That's good to know. I remember when they used to tell you to do that with your checkbook.
Mhm. I used to love balancing my checkbook.
Do you like to do? that?
I used to. But now I don't. It's too
I don't
much
do it anymore.
work.
The banks do it for me.
The banks do it.
You only have.
And they never make mistakes.
I know, that's why you have to sign in and monitor your checking account every day.
Oh, yeah, or your credit cards.
Mhm.
One time somebody charged $4,000 worth of marijuana growing equipment to our check.
Oops.
And they were from Arizona and we're like, and the credit card company didn't tell us. So I'm kind of going,
That didn't cause an
this
alert.
did not cause an alert. No, I'm not growing marijuana
Thought you were getting entrepreneurial.
in Arizona. Okay, reconciliations. Less than a year old, have a resolution. That doesn't mean a board resolution, right?
No,
Okay. It means they're fixed.
right.
Okay. Are accounts held by the treasurer reconciled? Yes. Does the district forecast general cash flow for current and subsequent year and updated as needed? This is something we also don't see much, but
True.
historically, given our reserves, it hasn't been considered to be a big problem.
True.
Um,
The level of
how
reserves.
so when does it occur internally? Like
That quarterly.
quarterly?
Mhm.
Okay,
I mean, the level of reserves that are required by the board policy is greater than 2 months of expenses,
Mhm.
which is the industry standard right now.
Yeah, they
So,
mentioned that.
So.
Okay, and I assume that's not summer expenses.
No.
I was told at one point that Andrea told the foundation we only had $40,000 left. So,
Well,
but I don't know.
I'm not even gonna make a comment.
I know. I said, I was told, by someone who should know. That did lead to a request for a cash flow. If it shows insufficient, doesn't matter. I guess, I mean, we do have a reasonable plan. I think, but it hasn't shown that.
Is that the NA because that never happens or because we don't have a cash flow forecast showing insufficient cash, or what if we did?
Yeah, so because the question is an if then,
Yeah,
if you didn't have enough, do you have this other thing in place? So that's
Yeah.
why it's not applicable, because we do have enough.
okay.
So far. So,
Yes, so far.
other funds. Well, this is like, isn't this a sort of a, do you have enough money in expenditure? To pay your expenditures?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Can you pay your bills?
Can
That's
you
the-
pay your bills?
That's what 4.6 is.
And what we're saying is yes, because we have reserves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Interfund borrowing, do we do that?
No.
Okay. That's what the NA means.
Mhm.
Um,
We don't
we're
have
not
any
doing
grants.
trans, which
Nope.
is an external borrowing.
Yep.
Okay. Oh, this is the one. 5.1, does the district accurately quantify the effects of collective bargaining agreements and include them in its budget and multi-year projections by conducting a pre-settlement analysis and in identifying ongoing revenue services or expenditure reductions to support the agreement? We weren't doing a good job of that.
In the past.
The plan is we
Uh-huh.
will, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why we're saying yes.
Correct.
Yes,
We will.
yes.
Okay. Current and prior 2 years, that was, you commented on that, how we're in process, basically. Settlements have not been released last 2 years, not applicable. District's Board of Governors approved and certified collective bargaining, no, that was
Mhm.
explained, we're in process. Faculty release and reassign time analysis in the last 2 years. Is this different from what was done in the budget sustainability, or are we referring back?
I think we're referring to that.
Mhm.
Yes,
Okay.
we're referring to the budget sustainability.
Because I think one of the recommendations was to
Look at
this more
that, which
closely.
is part of looking for following up with the NTCC in this bargaining.
Right, okay. So we're yes, because we did it in the last couple of years, but
Mhm.
we're getting to the point where we're going to approve it.
Mhm.
Okay. District have a board approved plan to eliminate or reduce it. Different transfers. Do we have a plan?
We have a plan to control intra-fund transfers. Yes. Well, I guess I could have put not applicable there rather than yes. We don't transfer from the restricted general fund.
We can,
to the
we have,
restricted.
but we occasionally. That I know of, but I don't think it was pursuant to any generalized plan. It was a time, the one that I remember, it was when the state did not adequately fund EOPS in our view, and we moved money over from general
Right.
unrestricted. So I don't know.
I mean, the
That
question,
might be an NA.
yeah, that
Yeah.
might be an NA,
Okay,
because it's a plan to eliminate, reduce, or control the transfers, but we don't do the transfer right now.
we are prejudiced against doing it.
Well, every area should pay for it.
And if we did it, the board would approve it, which is the next
Yes.
one.
Correct.
If the district has deficit spending in funds other than unrestricted, has it included its multi? Have we done that? Has that happened? 6.3,
Mhm.
we have transferred over to cure a negative fund balance.
Mhm. In parking or in food service or in the bookstore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Those,
Yeah.
Mhm.
okay. Did we budget at reasonable levels? We think so, we'll find out.
Yeah.
Okay, 7.1. No. I think we're agreed on that.
Mhm.
7.2. No. As a district decrease deficit spending, I didn't think we had. But
Well-
that may,
Yeah, I think we've decreased it because like with the analysis of the services, we've reduced the deficit over the, if Chris hadn't analyzed the services and reduced that by $2 million, even setting aside the contingency, we would have done more deficit spending.
right, but the big thing that we did was transfer in the leftover COVID
Last year.
last year. But this is past 2 fiscal years, right?
Yeah,
So what I was thinking was that was in effect reserves. I mean, that's how we treated them, as reserves. That it was leftover COVID.
It's true, but when we did the actual analysis, even had we not, we would have come in slightly to the good last year, even without the COVID-19 transfer, which we didn't know in the beginning. It just worked out that way. So I took this question to be looking at actual spending, and in the last 2 years, we haven't had the levels of deficit spending that we anticipated.
Okay. See, what I was looking at was the, that's a deficit spending when you take it out of COVID is how I was looking at it.
Mhm.
8.1. Actuarial, we do that.
Mhm.
Retiree board adopted plan, it's not so much a plan as it's in the budget, right?
Mhm,
Mhm.
Okay. To cover our health
Cause it's
benefit
very small.
mhm.
because they are small.
Yeah.
Yep,
Thank you. Clear contributions, that's in the budget.
yes.
Limit faculty banked hours. What policy is that?
Check on which AP it is, I don't, off the top of my head. Check on it.
I can look it up. I'll look it up if you wanna go on to the next one,
Okay.
so we don't spend.
In the last 5 years, verification and determination of eligibility for all active and retired. We've done that. That's a big job.
We don't do it, our health insurance provider does it. And they like to do it because they want to make sure they're not covering people they shouldn't. But yes.
That's nice.
Yes.
Go ahead, take the work.
I mean, does this include like spouses and things like that?
Yeah.
Right, so every so often they'll say, okay, you have a family plan and your spouse and 2 kids are on there. Every 2 or 3 years, I forget which it is. Say, okay, provide verification that those are still people that should be covered on your plan.
Your spouse is still there.
Right.
Okay,
Kids haven't aged out.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
okay, 88.6, track, reconcile and report employees compensated leave balance on the balance sheet. That's a no.
That is a no.
Is that
So
something?
we do track their balances, but we don't record it. We don't track it on the balance sheet itself.
Is that something we should do future wise?
The compensated leave balances was a recent change in the audit, tracking them in as an audit requirement. And so it will be that value will be included in
The audit?
the valuation in the audit. So it will be there, but it's not recorded on the balance sheet. So I don't know. I can check with Larry as the controller if that's something that
Okay,
he thinks we should do.
and compensation. Oh, are included in the financial statements, as you just said. 9.1, enrollment been increasing or remain stable? No. District monitor and analyze enrollment, weekly student contact hours and full-time equivalent students. At least monthly. Are we doing that? Who's doing that? Maria at all?
Maria looks at it, institutional research looks at it, we have a work group called the forecasting work group. Look at that data monthly basis.
Are we gonna do anything with the daily reports we get on enrollment that kind of,
Try to improve them.
yes,
Yes.
that would be nice. Track historic, are we doing trend stuff? That was definitely a recommendation in the budget sustainability, doing trends on WISH and FTS.
I believe Maria does, yes.
What's WISH?
Weekly student contact hours.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Are those faculty in class teaching? Okay, so, how often do you think we might see that?
Which, I'm sorry,
That's okay, 99.3
Are we tracking historical
trends.
WISH and FTES trend?
oh, yeah, we have, I mean, years, we have data dashboards that go back 10, 15, 20. We have a lot of it.
Is there a plan just to kind of present it? Here's where we are and here's where we're headed?
Well, I think we did an enrollment, I mean, obviously, we did it with our enrollment management forum last April, we're gonna do another one in December. And then I think we even did a student enrollment presentation to the board at one point, but
I think there was something in the retreat
yes.
relevant to
Yes,
that, but I was just
absolutely, there
thinking
was.
if we could, I don't know, semi-annually, something, take a look at that data.
Mhm.
That may be, not your area, Chris, so
Mhm.
much as, institutional
Yes,
data.
institutional research. Keller.
Keller. Multi-district, we don't care. Enrollment projections. Now, this is interesting. Do we do all those things? I mean, high school enrollments, do we know what that is? Does
Oh,
it-
yeah, we
Mhm.
absolutely do all of that. Yeah, that's all in Keller's area. We have all of that
Okay,
information.
so that's Keller.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
That would be good. Um. Yeah, institutional together, comprehensive enrollment goals, we have goals, the best for us, for our SIP,
Yes, I think it's in our educational master plan.
educational master plan.
Mhm. Our educational vision plan.
And we don't yet have the academic productivity, do we?
We have a goal, we're not quite there yet.
Hmm?
We have a goal, but we're not quite there yet.
No, but I mean, I don't know what the goal is.
16.
Hmm?
It was set at 16.
16. Wish,
No. If you use the wish calculation, it's the state standard is 525.
Mhm.
There's another version of it where you look at full-time equivalent student versus full-time equivalent faculty. That way of looking at it, the state target is 17 and a half.
Mhm.
We set our own internal target of getting to 16 because we were far below that. We're just about there now, so we're looking to reach the sort of standard state target at this point.
so we're looking to increase the goal.
Meet state standards, yeah.
Where is that found?
I believe the lower target is in the educational vision plan.
Mhm. I believe it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we
I
talked about that during our retreat, I remember.
I think there's information
We
in the
talked
retreat.
about progress and stuff. I didn't remember that we had actually established a
Mhm.
goal because in part, it tends to be controversial when you establish.
I think it's in the educational vision plan and or in the strategic enrollment management plan. I think it's all tied up.
Okay,
And banking of TLUs is actually in the FA contract.
Oh, thank you.
Contract faculty will be allowed to bank up to 15 TLUs per year. Single banking system will be used to bank overloads and or summer session TLUs. So
That's the maximum.
that's great.
okay.
And the bank TLU overload can be used to offset an underload applied pro rata toward a sabbatical leave for family leave and or can be paid to the instructor at their departure or retirement from the college following IRS regulations. And that is 2.16.1.1.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Sufficient available capital outlay or bond funds. Sort of. We can think of a lot more.
The question is to cover contracted obligations.
Yes,
Mhm.
you're right.
That we do.
That we do.
Do we
Yeah,
have enough to cover all our needs? No.
no, but we
And
can
yes,
cover what we
we
got
track
started.
Yeah.
And yes, we track it. Lecture classrooms, at least 48 or 53, no. Lab classrooms, no. Does the district include facility needs, maintenance, repair, and operating requirements when adopting a budget? And that's what we talked about earlier. I don't feel like we're there yet. So that for me was a no, but that we're on the way to doing that.
I think we do. Now, are there more needs than funds available? Yes. So I think there are two potential questions there, like, if you could pay for everything, do we have enough money to do that? We don't.
No.
But do we include budgets for the purpose of meeting the needs that we're aware of? We do. So I think it depends on how you read the question.
Yeah, I mean, include to me means, yeah, we covered it. You know, when we did the budget, but I think we're more in the neighborhood of, we put some money in.
Yeah, I mean, I think if include means,
Not much.
if include means we have enough to cover everything, it'll be a no forever.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know that, but it's sort of like, are we serious about this? Which circles back to what we to trying to figure out some numbers here. Ability condition index, we did that in the last 3 years, not probably through the foundation, but PECMAT's certainly a good place.
Right, we did not do it through the foundation.
Doesn't matter. Does it follow a 5-year scheduled maintenance plan?
No.
You said no. And that's probably something we should include in the work on.
Mhm.
I mean, I think it'd be great to see that plan ultimately, when it's ready. Bond, yes. 10.9 not applicable, 10.10. Aligns with the 5-year capital outlay plan. That's where I've always had difficulty. It's sort of like we have a master plan of or a vision plan for the facilities, and then we have a 5-year capital outlay plan that has more to do with where you might get some money from the state, and they don't align frequently.
Well, they don't align frequently for any district because of how everything falls, like you've got this big plan for your entire campus or campuses. And then you have these pots of money that may or may not come along, if like some buildings wouldn't necessarily jump to the top, but they're interested in funding, seismic safety, so we jump on board of that. So yes, and I don't think the system is set up in a way that colleges can do it any other way.
I get that. It's frustrating.
Yeah, but welcome to the
But
state.
I don't know if it qualifies for a yes.
I also think the way I read it is, in the 5-year capital outlay plan, are we asking for money for things that are not in the facilities vision plan? And I think we don't. When we ask for money in the 5-year capital outlay plan, those things are included in the
In
facilities
the
vision plan.
vision plan.
Right.
It may not be in the
So
same
they're
order.
aligned.
They may be a much lower priority or
Yeah.
It might
whatever.
be in a different order,
Yeah.
but they are included.
Right.
ADA plan?
We don't have that. That's one of the things that we need to work on as part of the bond program, because we do need an ADA transition plan. But you can't start that unless you know how you're gonna pay for it.
Mhm. But isn't that a no? Then we're not doing.
No,
it
because we
have
don't,
one?
we don't have one. So if we had one, and we weren't following it, then the answer would be, are we because it's asking if we're following a plan that has been developed in the last 5 to 10 years. We don't have that plan, so we're not following a plan we don't have.
That's kind of worse.
Well-
Not following it.
Well, the bottom line is we are not violating a plan we don't have.
You guys didn't ask the question, right?
Right,
Do
they
you
didn't
have a
ask the
plan?
question, like, do you have a plan? No, it doesn't ask that. It says, are we following the plan we don't have?
I'm more substantively, if you don't have a plan, you're worse off. Okay.
But But I'm sorry, did you say, are we making progress toward making a plan?
We're gonna need to do that as part of the bond projects.
Okay.
Because we know, like, we need to deal with paving. But, once you're dealing with paving, then we're gonna have to deal with what's called path of travel or transition plans. Because you have the parking lots that are one thing, and then you have the sidewalks that you walk across on campus that are transition plan.
We know they're too rough, or the angle of the pathway is too
Yeah,
deep, or
It's too steep.
things like that.
So do we need to make this a priority or are you saying
That's-
we'll already?
That's something that Chris and I will talk with the bond work group when
Uh-huh.
we do the prioritization of projects. We'll, obviously, paving should be at the top, because we do have a paving issue.
Yeah.
But my argument would be an ADA transition plan, also known as path of travel, would be pretty high up there, because we do have some slopes and other things that are not compliant.
And is this part, did we approve
Hmm.
the bond fund for the paving, the $5 million?
No, we haven't done that yet because we haven't brought it to you, but we're doing the scoping.
Yes,
Yes.
we had an assessment completed, so I will have a presentation on the board agenda that presents the data from the assessment.
Mhm.
And then the next step for us will be to hire an architect and engineer to get the plans together and submit to the Department of State Architect. And then they have to say yes, and then we hire a contractor.
Oh, okay, that's.
Lots of
all right.
steps, unfortunately.
Who knew paving was so
Mhm.
difficult?
Well, it
a
was
little
a
more-
last minute change.
Yeah, a little more than 2 years ago, DSA didn't like to review parking lots, but, and I think what this relates to is they now have a minimum number of EV chargers per parking lot.
Hmm.
And when that changed, now they want to look at parking lots. So now they get to, they always cared about ADA path of travel components, but they didn't have to do the full assessment of parking lots, but now they want the full assessment.
So do we have enough EV chargers?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
we're a little ahead of the curve on that. Some districts have not, or very little. Plus our microgrid project is adding, I think, 20
Yeah, I know that will
EV chargers.
Yeah.
Okay, policies to maintain sufficient unrestricted reserves, yes.
Yep.
Budgets subsequent 2 years. At least 2 months of operating expenditures, yes, I assume.
Mhm.
And this is 2 months general fund operating in the reserve. I don't know why those are different questions, but anyway, yeah.
And just to give you a heads up, I need to leave in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
That's fine, we're getting
yeah.
close to
Okay.
the time, yeah, well, 10 minutes would be 6 o'clock. Yeah, I was gonna cut it off. Do you need to leave earlier?
No,
Okay.
Do you want us to bring this back next time to finish?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should just finish them.
Okay.
11.4, projections do not include a least at minimum. Board approved plan to restore. Why is that a no? Isn't that an NA?
Oh, yeah, it is an NA, not a no.
General.
Because it starts with if the district does not include at least a minimum.
Mm-hmm.
then we do.
Yeah. Okay. I can change that to NA. I put that as a no because,
Because we don't have a plan to put the money back.
and
Yeah, we do
Yeah.
not, but if we needed to, we would hope to
yes,
have that plan.
and we had 2 versions of future projections, one that included
Mhm.
resolving the deficit and one that didn't include resolving the deficit, so. Partly for that reason.
Stable or increasing? No. Unfunded contingent liabilities, one-time costs. include sufficient reserves above the recommended minimum reserve level. That is that a yes? Or what are we saying here?
We don't have, it's not applicable because it's an if then, so the if is, do you have unfunded contingent liabilities or one-time costs other than post-employment benefits? We don't. So not applicable.
All right. One-time revenue not pay for ongoing expenditures. That's one where I would have said no. Since we have deficit spending, how do you attribute it in any particular place?
I guess I don't know what you mean.
Well, when we have that deficit number, is it deficit for paying faculty salaries? Is it deficit for paying classified salaries? Is it deficit for paying CalPERS? All of that is something is using one-time revenues, which is our reserves for that deficit. And it's usually an ongoing expense. It's not a one-time expense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, if we use the reserves to backfill, that would make sense, but in the. Yeah, okay.
At or below 85% for the 3 prior years is what's the no, because this year
Mhm.
we're
Correct.
at. Is the district in compliance 50% law? Yes, we are. Is it at or above the fund?
So we are above the fawn, but we're not above the fawn more than 3%. Is that why it's a no?
Correct.
Okay.
And nobody is right now.
Right.
Because of the emergency conditions allowance.
No, wait a minute, but we're above the fawn, but how much above the fawn? Because it's within 3%.
I think it's.
So if we're like at
14
2% above the fawn, we would be a yes, wouldn't
Isn't
we?
it 14 positions?
Yeah,
So,
So it's greater than 3%? Is that what we're saying?
Right.
Greater than 3% above?
of the fawn. So this is true of almost
Okay.
all districts. So what happened during the pandemic is the districts said, yeah, most districts said, yes, I want emergency conditions allowance money, which means you used the student center funding formula used pre-pandemic enrollment numbers to provide your funding. What the fawn is based on the funding level you receive, not your actual enrollments. So because of that, our fawn obligation was higher when we had the emergency conditions in place, because we were getting that money. Now we don't have those emergency conditions in place. Now they're using the actual 3-year average for us. So now our fawn obligation goes down. We don't suddenly fire a bunch of full-time faculty as a result of that. So we're in the same position that lots and lots of districts are in, where suddenly your funding amount is lower, but your staffing level doesn't automatically shrink to match that.
Right, okay.
Got it.
Yeah.
So they want you to be over, but not too much over.
correct. They do not want you to be too much over.
Okay.
But we are too much because of the way this is played out.
Correct.
But
Okay.
we're working on it.
Mhm.
As we're getting retirements, we're,
Mhm.
making appropriate decisions to
Mhm.
realign that.
Make sure restricted dollars sufficient for paying for staff. We're okay on that. I think we didn't used to be, but it's good that we're caught up on that.
Mhm.
Restricted dollars fully, we talked about that
Mhm.
within the required time, yes.
Partly because they let us take longer, but yes.
They gave us an extension. Consistently account for all program costs, including maximum L, yeah. Good with that. Human resources system and position control system integrated with financial reporting system. So we are integrated,
Yeah, position
Mhm.
control is, yes.
good.
Mhm.
Emergency data recovery system,
Mhm.
we have that. Our enrollment class schedule software and budget development systems integrated.
No.
No. Is that gonna change?
I think it depends on whether or not Course Leaf ever makes that connection.
Mhm.
Course Leaf is ours, newly implemented course scheduling software. I think they have promised that they will communicate with Banner.
And we're waiting.
Mhm.
Okay. Seems like something that should happen.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Security measures
Mhm.
regularly.
Yep.
Reports from management information to validate outcomes in this. If, why no?
Because we have, we're in the process of developing the reporting for those items.
Okay,
IR is actively, Keller is actively in her areas, actively developing the report.
okay, let's stop here.
Okay.
We've only got a few left, but still interesting.
Well, we're glad we gave you something interesting.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you did.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And consider ourselves adjourned.
Okay,
Thank you.
wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.